Welcome back, truth seekers. Today, a relentless rain lashed against the windows of Buckingham Palace, as if the heavens themselves mourned. Inside, King Charles III sat in solitude within his private study, 76, weary, and cloaked in a silence heavier than his crown. The battles he'd faced, political firestorms, royal betrayals, tabloid-feeding frenzies, had never prepared him for this. A letter lay in his trembling hands, its contents etched in brutal finality. A diagnosis, rare, aggressive, merciless. Even the finest physicians couldn't cure it, only delay the inevitable. The king's composure cracked. Silent tears fell, not from fear, but from the cruel clarity of borrowed time. It had started as a routine checkup. His doctor, a fixture in royal halls for decades, hesitated before uttering the truth. Anomalies, then scans, then certainty. How long? Charles asked, voice barely audible. The answer, months, maybe a year, hit harder than any scandal ever had. He returned to the palace cloaked in secrecy, needing time to process what death now demanded. But even a monarch can't carry such a burden alone. He turned to Queen Camilla, his stalwart anchor. Together, in whispered hours, they grieved not for what was, but what would never be. He feared not death, but the crown's future. William, Kate, the grandchildren. George, still too young to understand. Late nights blurred into strategy sessions. How to break the silence. How to protect the legacy. William, already buckling under public pressure, received the news with stoic resolve. Kate, graceful as ever, offered comfort, but her glistening eyes betrayed her heartbreak. George was spared the full truth, but Charles mourned the moments he might miss, birthdays, milestones, a young king-in-waiting he might never guide. Yet, amid this family's sorrow, one name festered, Meghan. Once welcomed with open arms, she was now a phantom pain. Since stepping away in 2020, Meghan had flourished in California, curating a public image polished in gloss and grievance. Her interviews, her documentaries, each felt to Charles like a dagger, reopening wounds that had barely begun to scar. He had reached out, quietly, humbly, letters, emissaries, hopes of healing. But each effort was met with calculated distance or, worse, public reproach. Her narrative thrived on royal dysfunction. Her brand fed on cold castles and colder hearts. And now, as his health faded, the absence burned deeper. Not just hurt, but anger. At her, at himself, for believing she might return, for hoping she cared. Within the palace walls, advisors murmured about the future. Succession strategies, public messaging, how to calm a kingdom without chaos. But Charles demanded to speak for himself, not as a dying man, but as a sovereign standing tall. He drafted the speech by hand, every syllable soaked in legacy. He spoke of service, of William's readiness, of faith in the monarchy's future. Not once did he name Meghan or Harry, a silence louder than thunder. As the announcement day loomed, Charles reflected on his reign. A lifetime preparing for this crown, only to find it heavier than any prophecy foretold. The burden of history, the ache of fractured family ties. And Meghan, still out there, building her empire atop royal rubble. He remembered their first meetings. Her wit, her charm, the hope. How had it soured so fast? Did she ever wonder about the pain she caused, or was she too lost in her own script? The morning of the broadcast was bleak. Charles stood before the cameras, pale but unbroken. He spoke with grace, his voice steady though emotion swelled behind his eyes. "I have been blessed to serve you," he said, "and I will continue for as long as I am able." The nation responded with love. Letters, flowers, prayers from across the globe. But from Montecito, only silence. No statement. No gesture. Just cold indifference. Weeks passed. Charles poured himself into duty. He met with ministers, championed his causes, shared laughter with grandchildren. But news of Meghan's new ventures, the memoirs, the next expose, kept surfacing. Always another chapter. Always more royal blood to spill. To him, it felt like betrayal, not just of family, but of a nation. What did she gain by keeping wounds open? As spring blurred into summer, Charles weakened. Public smiles masked private pain. Camilla stood beside him, William close, Kate a steady light. But the distance from Harry and the silence from Meghan gnawed at him. He wrote one final letter to Harry. A father's heart poured into ink. No mention of Meghan. Some gaps, he'd learned, would never be bridged. The people, unaware of how close the end truly was, rallied around their monarch. His humility, his quiet strength, his decades of unwavering duty. But in those final, precious moments, his solace came not from the crown, but from love. Camilla's touch, William's loyalty, George's laughter. Meghan's shadow still lingered, but Charles let it go. He chose peace. He chose grace. As autumn crept in, he faced the days ahead with clear eyes. The monarchy would endure. His chapter was ending, but the story would go on, carried by those who still believed. He was a king, a father, a man, and he would meet his final hour not with fear, but with dignity.